Good afternoon, Eagles Nation. I hope you're all having an amazing day. Before we get started, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss any Philadelphia Eagles updates. Your support means a lot and really helps the channel grow. Now, let's get right into today's news. The Philadelphia Eagles are heading into the 2026 season surrounded by a level of excitement that feels impossible to ignore. But at the same time, there are several important questions that could ultimately determine whether this team becomes a legitimate Super Bowl contender or falls short of those expectations. Right now, the conversation around Philadelphia is being driven by optimism, and for good reason. The roster remains loaded with talent, the defense continues to evolve under Vic Fangio, and there is growing belief that the offensive changes could unlock an entirely different version of this football team. One of the biggest developments for Eagles fans is that the official open training camp practice dates have now been announced. The open practice will take place on August 25th at 6 p.m. at Lincoln Financial Field, with proceeds benefiting the Eagles Autism Foundation. Training camp always marks the moment when anticipation becomes reality. It's when all the offseason discussions, projections, and expectations finally begin to take shape on the field. But beyond the excitement surrounding training camp and ticket sales, the real story is what this Eagles roster looks like heading into one of the most fascinating seasons in recent memory. If you're looking for reasons to believe, the defense is probably where the confidence starts. Continuity matters in the NFL, and the Eagles are entering another season with Vic Fangio's system becoming more familiar to the players. Instead of spending valuable time learning assignments and adjusting to communication responsibilities, the expectation is that players will react faster, play more instinctively, and perform at an even higher level. That becomes especially important when you look at the talent Philadelphia has assembled across the defensive front. Jalen Carter remains one of the most important players on the entire roster. There is already growing belief around the league that he could emerge as a serious defensive player of the year candidate. When Carter is healthy, focused, and dominating at the line of scrimmage, he changes games. His combination of strength, explosiveness, and physicality makes him one of the most disruptive interior defenders in football. What makes this situation even more intriguing is that Carter enters the season with additional motivation. Contract discussions continue to be a major topic surrounding his future, and while there is confidence that a deal will eventually get done, every dominant performance only increases his value. The encouraging part for Philadelphia is that reports indicate Carter is healthy and ready to handle a significant workload, and he isn't alone. Jordan Davis continues to develop into a force against the run while showing growth as a pass rusher. Moro Ohomo also emerged as a player who delivered impressive production, particularly during stretches when Carter was dealing with injuries. Together, that trio gives Philadelphia one of the strongest interior defensive groups in the NFL. Then there is the edge group. Nolan Smith, Jalex Hunt, and Ugo Bernard provide Fangio with multiple ways to attack opposing offenses. The versatility within that group creates opportunities for creative pressure packages while giving the Eagles flexibility throughout games. The secondary may be even more exciting. Quinyon Mitchell has already established himself as one of the premier young cornerbacks in football. Cooper DeJean continues to prove that he can impact games from multiple positions. Meanwhile, Kelly Ringo possesses the type of playmaking ability that can become even more dangerous when quarterbacks avoid throwing toward Mitchell's side of the field. The one area where questions remain is safety. Andrew Makuba possesses considerable upside, but durability remains something he still needs to prove. Marcus Epps provides reliability and experience, yet the overall confidence level at safety does not seem to match what exists at several other positions. That is why many people still believe Philadelphia could explore potential additions before the season begins. Overall, however, the defense looks like the strength of the football team. The offense is where things become more complicated. There is tremendous optimism surrounding the new offensive direction, but there are also legitimate questions. A new offensive coordinator brings new concepts, new terminology, and new expectations. Growing pains are always possible, especially early in the season. Still, many within the organization believe the offense simply has to be better than it was last year. The biggest reason for that confidence is the belief that the scheme will be more aggressive, more creative, and better designed to challenge opposing defenses. There is increasing excitement surrounding Sean Mannion's influence on the offense. Players reportedly appreciate the way he teaches concepts and explains not only what they are doing, but why they are doing it. That matters, especially for a quarterback like Jalen Hurts. Hurts continues to face criticism despite repeatedly proving doubters wrong throughout his career. Whether it was becoming an MVP finalist, leading deep playoff runs, or delivering elite performances on football's biggest stages, Hurts has consistently answered questions about his ability. Now he enters another season with a new offensive system, but there is confidence that the changes could actually help him. More under center formations, improved play sequencing, expanded play action opportunities, and a more structured passing attack all have the potential to make life easier for both Hurts and the offense as a whole. At the same time, there is one major factor that may ultimately determine how far this team goes, and it revolves around the running game. Philadelphia's most successful teams have consistently been dominant rushing teams, and the Eagles understand that returning to that identity could be critical if they want to compete for a championship. The good news is that there are several reasons to believe improvement is possible. Lane Johnson is healthy, Cam Jurgens and Landon Dickerson are healthier than they were a season ago. Philadelphia returns all 5 starting offensive linemen. Continuity across the offensive line could become one of the biggest advantages this team has entering the season, but there is another side to that discussion, and it's a topic that many Eagles fans have started paying close attention to. Can the running game return to elite form, and will Saquon Barkley be able to maintain his effectiveness after handling such a massive workload over the last several seasons? That question may become one of the defining storylines of the entire year, and the answer could have a major impact on Philadelphia's championship hopes. With so much confidence surrounding the defense, a new offensive vision beginning to take shape, and several key players entering critical seasons, do you believe the Eagles' biggest strength in 2026 will be the defense or the offense? The running game remains one of the most fascinating storylines surrounding this team because there are arguments on both sides of the debate. On one hand, the Eagles have every reason to believe they can get back to being one of the league's most physical and productive rushing attacks. On the other hand, there are legitimate concerns that cannot simply be ignored. Saquon Barkley is still one of the most talented players in football, but the workload he has carried over the past few seasons is impossible to overlook. The numbers tell a story that many Eagles fans would rather not think about. Historically, running backs who experience extremely heavy workloads often see some decline in efficiency afterward. That doesn't automatically mean Barkley is headed for a drop-off season, but it does create a situation worth monitoring closely. What makes this discussion more complicated is that last year's rushing struggles cannot be placed entirely on Barkley's shoulders. The running game is dependent on scheme, blocking, health, and overall offensive execution. There were stretches where no running back would have been expected to produce consistently behind the circumstances Philadelphia was dealing with. Still, Barkley is approaching his age 29 season, and that naturally creates questions about how the Eagles should manage his workload moving forward. That is why the role of Tank Bigsby could become much more important than many people realize. If Bigsby can provide explosive plays and meaningful production, Philadelphia could create a true 1-2 punch in the backfield. Not only would that help keep Barkley fresh throughout the season, but it would also make the offense less predictable and more difficult to defend. The Eagles don't necessarily need Barkley touching the ball at the same rate he did during his heaviest workload years. In fact, reducing that burden may actually benefit the team over the course of a long season. Then there is the passing game, where another major transition is taking place. With changes to the receiving group, some critics believe Philadelphia could take a step backward offensively. The Eagles clearly don't share that concern. Internally, there appears to be significant confidence in Devonta Smith taking on an even larger role within the offense. Smith has already demonstrated everything coaches look for in a top receiving option. His route running is elite. His toughness has never been questioned. His ability to perform in big moments has been proven repeatedly. The belief is that increased opportunities could allow him to become an even more dominant force. However, that confidence also creates additional pressure on the offensive coaching staff. The scheme must put players in positions to succeed. The offense cannot rely solely on individual talent. That reality is one of the biggest reasons why the organization committed to making significant changes on that side of the football. Philadelphia wants an offense that creates opportunities rather than forcing players to overcome difficult situations on every drive, and perhaps nobody has more at stake than Nick Sirianni. This season feels incredibly important for his future. future. Success would validate the organizational changes and strengthen confidence in the direction of the franchise. Failure would almost certainly lead to difficult questions about whether further changes are necessary. That's part of what makes this season so compelling. The Eagles have talent throughout the roster. They have star players at premium positions. They have one of the NFL's most respected defensive minds leading a loaded defense. They have a quarterback who has repeatedly shown the ability to thrive under pressure. Yet there are still enough unknowns to prevent anyone from declaring this team a guaranteed contender. Another reason for optimism comes from the schedule. For a team coming off a division title, Philadelphia appears to have received a relatively manageable draw. Games against teams like the Bears, Panthers, and Steelers provide opportunities to build momentum. Of course, nothing is guaranteed in the NFL, but compared to some first-place schedules from previous years, this one appears far more favorable. That doesn't mean the road will be easy. The Seahawks, Rams, Packers, Lions, 49ers, and Cowboys all represent serious challenges. Each brings different strengths and different problems that Philadelphia will have to solve. There are enough difficult opponents on the schedule to ensure that the Eagles will be tested throughout the season. When looking at the NFC East, though, Philadelphia still appears to have the strongest overall roster. The Cowboys remain the biggest threat within the division. Despite questions surrounding Dallas, they possess enough talent to create problems and remain competitive. Their schedule appears more difficult than Philadelphia's, and there are still concerns about the overall depth of their roster, particularly on defense. Even so, no Eagles fan should expect those games to be easy. As for Washington, there are significant concerns about both sides of the ball. Defensively, they struggled against both the run and the pass,